Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Big Brother Canada 5, and I'm going to say it outright. This is the best season of Big Brother Canada, especially if I'm just looking at the 5 seasons, where in the past 4 season recaps, I mentioned that they're all pretty close together based on how I feel about them and the quality of the seasons, but with this season, it is well ahead of all the others. You have it all. You have great strategy, not much twists, a lot of drama, a lot of dynamic personalities, and it has all the ingredients of a really good Big Brother season. While this would have been a good way to end the franchise, which it did happen once it was initially cancelled, I'm so glad that we got many more seasons after this, and this season is the perfect way to wrap up the first era of Big Brother Canada, though you could even split this up into 2 eras, with the first 2 seasons being the Slice era and season 3 to season 5 being the global, or the beginning of the global era. Either way, season 5 wraps up the first 5 seasons well, and from this point onward, it'll be very fresh. So for week 1, we actually have a really great week 1, which almost never happened, and it's one of the most impactful week 1s ever, since we heard about it many other times afterwards, not only in the episodes, but on the feeds. Like all of my other season recaps and reviews, I'm going to start with the cast intros. So Dylan mentions being a fighter, Dre mentions her extra personality will help her, Mark talks about bartending and being shirtless, helping him with the girls, and Jackie mentions that she gets along better with boys than girls, which is very enlightening based on how she behaves during this season. And she also mentions that she has a fiery personality. Jackie and Mark talk about being jocks, and Dylan mentions having a heart of gold or whatever. Emily mentions her sense of humor, which is a mixed bag. Karen talks about being a real estate agent. Dimitri takes off his shirt and mentions how people see him as a gym monkey. William mentions being a francophone. They make Emily come off into some tough rocker and mentions her interest in the showmance with a muscular man. Then they show Dimitri flexing and talking about loving the girls. This has me questioning whether they are trying to set them up as a showmance, which is so laugh out loud at this point, especially with what happens to the both of them in the season. And Karen mentions being a mom, making her a tough fighter. We see the returning house guests, with Netta mentioning being cut by John and falling in love with him caused her to deter things, and we know that they dated for 2 years in between seasons. But now she wants to play for herself, she doesn't want to train anyone, and is going to play like a biatch this time. The latter 2 points kind of indicates her direction and trajectory in the season, and it's not for the best. Kevin mentions that BBCAN5 was the best time of his life and is still not over the triple, so he wants to play with the big dogs like Emmett, Gary, and Netta. Interesting he mentions those 3 names, and we know that Emmett would have been on the season if he didn't film The Amazing Race Canada beforehand, and he was still on contract with CTV. And it's clear that he knew that it was a returning season. Aika mentions her letter shredding moments, and she's going to be a fighter, and she's going to play harder than ever. Dallas mentions that he had a girlfriend in BBCAN4, but is single now, though I think he dated Paige for a bit after that season though, if I remember correctly, and he's going to play differently now. Aika enters first, then Kevin, then Dallas, and then Netta, with the latter thinking that the newbies are internationals. Dimitri mentions how good all the returnees look, and it's always interesting seeing real-life relationships form, like how Dominic initially reacted to Danielle in Big Brother 13. Noah seems excited to have Dallas back in the house though, which definitely isn't a good sign for his fate in this season. Cassandra plays up being a villain and wants to play the exact same game as last season, which we know how that will go this season, and she has an inflated sense of ego from being the fave last season. Gary talks about how he technically won, so it makes sense why he came back, where he wants to have the cake and the icing. Bruno mentions that his temper got the best of him and was twist screwed. Cindy mentions that she has done a lot of pageants since BBCAN3 and how she wants to improve from her horrible gameplay from her first season. Cindy enters first, which Aika rolls her eyes over since they had issues outside of the house. Bruno then enters, then Cassandra, and lastly, Gary. A veteran and a newbie are paired up for the first HOH competition, where Cindy and Karen end up being the final ones, though they make a deal with Dre and Ika to keep them safe if they drop, and Karen takes the first HOH. I also forgot that Dallas and Mark, who I believe were their third last pair, made a deal with the other remaining ones that if they dropped, the others would be kept safe, which, yeah, very ironic now. So Karen is glad that she won, since everyone will now come to her, and Cindy intentionally wants to manipulate Karen. Jackie and Karen have a discussion where she mentions that the brain and muscles, like Dimitri and Dylan, are on her side, though I think the latter two were for the muscles and the brain were the vets, if I remember correctly. Cindy tells Cassandra and Ika that she wants Karen to put up 2 newbies, and the vets should stick together, where most of the newbies are gone beforehand. Gary and William talk about the latter's crush on Kevin, and Gary wants the newbies to feel like he has no ties to the veterans. Karen mentions Mark and Netta to Cindy, and Cindy mentions that Netta doesn't want to go after women, so Karen mentions Mark and Dimitri. Karen nominates Mark and Dimitri for eviction. Interesting how Karen mentions that Mark will get into a showmance, which he won't let happen, but based on her actions later in the season with the other nominee is very ironic. From what we were told about the first week, apparently Dimitri handled his nomination very well and Mark didn't, which caused him and Karen to clash, and Jackie and Kevin sided with him, but of course none of this was captured in the episodes. The nominees think that the move was dumb, though they don't realize that the rules are different with veteran and newbie mixed seasons, since the safest play is to nominate 2 people who fell off first. Kevin, Cindy, and Bruno are working together and are proud of it, where she mentions that Karen mentioned his name, I think Bruno's or Kevin's, I don't remember which one, a few times. Dre, Dylan, and I think Jackie, though I don't remember the third person, mentioned what Karen will do if the veto is used, and she mentions going after a big veteran, but it's clear that she's all over the place and no one takes her seriously, which will follow her for the rest of the season. Dimitri keeps on mentioning that he's Greek like it's a personality trait in a lot of the early episodes. Anyways, people lost for Mark during the veto competition, but Bruno ends up winning it, and of course doesn't use it, despite the newbies, both of them, claiming that he is good with them. Bruno, Kevin, and Mark talk briefly, and the season 3 guys want to keep Mark in the house. They claim Netta, Ika, Dylan, and Emily, as well as Cindy, would vote to keep Mark. They and Netta start lusting after Mark some more. Cassandra and Dimitri talk in the pantry room, and she's telling him that he needs to put a target on Dylan, so people will keep him. Dimitri pulls off Cassandra's strategy, where he pushes Dylan's buttons during the pool game and forces a fight. Cassandra and Gary are in the HOH room with Cindy, and the latter mentions that all the veterans but them want Mark to stay. Gary storms off and walks to Ika, where he tells her what he was told about the veterans wanting Mark to stay. Ika gets Cindy into the room and yells at her for claiming that she told her that she wanted Mark to stay. I'm pretty sure Ika had a crush on Dimitri by this point. Karen is told about the plan, where it seems like she wants Mark gone, and she confirmed later, and she mentions that this crap is why none of the veterans won. We are told that the plan before the live show is that Mark will be going home in an almost unanimous vote, but Bruno and Kevin decide to do a last-minute flip, since Dimitri is Cassandra's number and Mark will be theirs, which includes Netta and Ika, apparently. Apparently, Mark told Bruno that he's going home because Cassandra said that Ika and Gary led this charge, so Ika tells Mark that it was not them, and Gary snaps at Cassandra. Gary mentions that Mark isn't going anywhere before confronting her. Cassandra and Ika confront Mark in front of the entire house, and he admits that it's a lie. Apparently, during this situation, Cassandra mentioned that she wanted to backdoor Netta, which we will delve more into sooner than later. Despite this, it causes a split vote, but it's great to watch. And apparently, Ika had to do some last-minute cleanup for Dimitri. Mark is evicted in a 7-6 vote, and it's revealed that Canada voted for Netta to receive safety until jury. So, out of the first boots, Mark is clearly the most memorable first boot in Big Brother Canada history, and I think we could say that he is the best first boot in Big Brother history, but that clearly doesn't say much because he's still a first boot. It just seemed like the worst case scenario happened to him, where he is in a mixed season where the newbies are obviously targeted, and usually the newbie males are targeted before anyone else, which happened in Big Brother 13 and somewhat Big Brother 11 as well. Where if he was in a newbie season, a young, white, attractive, muscle showman's guy like him would make it far in most seasons. I don't think he would have been targeted if most of the other house guests won HOH, but he didn't handle his nomination well. He and Jackie, as well as someone Kevin, pissed Karen off. And while it was impressive that Bruno and Kevin tried to flip to save him and a few other people wanted to keep him, he did fold in the lie, which caused the votes to go back onto him, where if he stuck his guns, he probably makes it very far in the season and essentially takes Dimitri's place. He is definitely one of the biggest what ifs, especially potential wise, but I can't rank him too highly because we didn't see much of him and he wasn't on feet, but he didn't do a whole lot wrong, especially compared to other first and early boots. Week 2 continues the great momentum that Week 1 started with, and it calls for the season to have one of the strongest, if not the strongest starts in BBCAN history. So despite just receiving immunity until jury, Neda wants to win more comps and to make big moves, so she won't be seen as a coaster. Cassandra and Gary make up, and Gary tells her that she's becoming too hot in the game, meaning she's doing too much. Dimitri goes from the block to being HOH, and the likes of Dylan are worried. Cassandra keeps on mentioning that he is her protege and will do whatever she wants, which is not accurate, and even by the time the feeds came on at this point, it was clear that it wasn't the case. So, not a great read on her part. Bruno is worried, since he pushed for Dimitri to go home and was on the wrong vote, so all this mess was technically his fault. He is nervous about making the wrong choice, and Ika mentions that the split vote makes it look like the vets aren't working together. She tells Bruno that she can repair the relationship between the two of them, and she starts working Dimitri on Bruno, but mentions that Dallas and Dylan are not to be trusted. I do think that while Dallas and Dylan were a part of it, though they weren't the leaders of the vote, they didn't have much social capital at this point, which is why the likes of Bruno and Kevin were able to get away with it more, and weren't put in the crossfire, and also because they were more aligned with the veterans. We do get a segment of Dallas and Dylan being bros and getting along, but are very nervous when Dimitri wins HOH. Dallas wants to have Cassandra pitch in their favor to Dimitri, but they think that the two of them will be nominated. Dylan then speaks to Emily and mentions that Dimitri is intimidated by him, and we learn that he and Emily have been very close over the last 4 days. Emily feels like she is getting nominated since she's the only girl that isn't close to him, and she is close to Dylan, so she speaks to Dimitri, but nothing comes out of the conversation. For some reason, we see a bunch of girls sleeping in Dimitri's HOH room all the time in a montage, but it's clear Ika is always there. The two of them talk about the game, and she is his number one ally. She mentions that one of Dylan, Dallas, Emily, and Jackie need to leave this week, since they were 4 of the 6 votes that voted him out. Dylan does not want to campaign to Dimitri, since the latter told him that he would go on the block if he, meaning Dimitri, won HOH. Dallas decides to pitch for himself and Dylan to Dimitri, mentioning that his pride was his downfall last season, and then we get a segment of Dallas and most of the men twerking for some reason. Cassandra and Dimitri talk about Ika being a hot mom, and he mentions that after she leaves that she is attractive. Cassandra and Dimitri do some general game talk before Jackie pitches to him, since she mentioned that she promised Mark her vote well ahead of time. She then ends up getting into an argument with Karen about Jackie pitching for Mark to stay in the house, and allegedly, Karen said that Jackie told her that she would vote to keep Dimitri, which Jackie claims never happened, before dramatically storming off and having a meltdown to anyone who would hear. Cassandra and Ika end up having to calm Jackie down, and Karen pitches to Dimitri that he should put up Jackie, since she was campaigning for him to leave due to her crush on Mark, though Jackie had a boyfriend. Dimitri ends up nominating Dylan and Emily for eviction. Things are awkward between Dylan and Dimitri after nominations, and Emily hides in a corner after nominations. We quickly see Dimitri getting brought into the Majority Veteran Alliance, which includes Neda, Ika, Cindy, Kevin, and Bruno. Emily and Dylan debate about what they would do if one of them won the veto, and Dylan throws some shade about Dimitri being all gel and tight pants, and they think that Karen might go up since she nominated him. Neda talks to the cameras about wanting to make Cassandra proud, which sadly doesn't happen for her, and hoping that she isn't overplaying, which, ha ha ha! Dylan ends up winning the veto, though Netta remembers her BBCAN2 strategy of throwing competitions here, as she did throw this one, and Dimitri isn't pleased at all, as the two of them throw more shade at one another. It is clear that the replacement nominee is either going to be Karen, which I don't know if this was actually the case in reality, or Dallas, who was initially excited about Dylan winning the veto for some reason. Cassandra and Dallas talk, and he mentions that he does not trust any of the male veterans, but is preferring for Dallas to go. Cassandra mentions that she can control Dallas and that she wants Kevin and Bruno out, since she's not over them trying to flip the last vote, like full masterminds, to get at her. Dimitri enters the conversation, and he mentions that whoever is the replacement will be the one that goes home. Cassandra pulls Dallas into the room and to not tell Ika anything, but she mentions that Bruno is trying to get him to go on the block, and that he needs to push Bruno onto Dimitri. Dallas mentions that if he's not nominated, he will protect Dimitri, and Bruno eavesdrops on the conversation between the two of them. Dimitri mentions that he doesn't trust that Dallas will not be with Dylan. Dimitri has a conversation with Ika and Cassandra during their tea time, I think, about the replacement nominee, and of course Cassandra pitches that what Dallas is stating is correct, while reminding him that the two women saved him from being a first boot. Dallas is nervous, and Ika mentions that he effed up, since he was grouping up with Emily and Dylan and not reporting back to the veterans, which all the other veterans did about their relationships with the newbies. Ika tells Dallas emotionally that he's going home if he goes up, and Dallas groups all the veterans but Gary and Cassandra together to get them aligned with one another, but it's clear no one is budging. Dylan vetoes himself and is replaced by Dallas on the block. Before he's even nominated, we see the BBCAN3 speeches that continue to plague over these middle seasons continue, with Dallas mentioning that he will go after Dylan if he is nominated and staying in the house. Dallas ends up quoting Maddie from last season about Dylan's ASS being grass, and he ends up immediately arguing with Dylan after the veto ceremony in front of the entire house. Dylan makes fun of Dimitri's gelled out hair. Dallas mentions something about Dylan's shoe collection, and then Dimitri is befuddled that Dylan doesn't like his hair. Cindy ends up dancing in the HOH room, and I think she did this in BBCAN3 as well, and we see the start of Kevin and William's showmance. Kevin mentions that he is using William and is doing this for business, so it's the same thing with Johnny from BBCAN3. Emily mentions to Jackie and Dre that she and Dylan will target Ika and Cindy if she wins HOH, and that the newbies need to stick together. Emily mentions having some huge plan that will cause her to stay over Dallas, and this was a complete falsity, especially from what actually happened on the feeds. Emily tells Dylan to be nice with Dallas, so it will make it seem like Dallas faked everything, and we see Karen questioning Dallas on this, since it would be the third time he broke his word to her, apparently. We get a funny segment of Gary giving Ika long eyebrows, which is hilarious. Emily pitches to Kevin and Bruno about Dallas making a final two with Dylan, which is a lie, but in reality, they were never keeping Dallas due to his association with Cassandra and the vets of BBCAN in general at this point not liking Big Brother Canada 4. Dallas then decides to pitch to the newbies that he would work with them and would target a veteran. Dallas and Dylan end up arguing once again, since he knows that Dylan and Emily are telling people that Dallas faked the fight. None of this matters, since Dallas ends up being voted out in a 12-0 vote. Dallas mentions that Dimitri told him that he was going to put up Jackie, which the edit showed otherwise, so this was probably a feed thing, and he saw Dimitri's and Cindy speak. And Dimitri blamed everything on Cindy being this mastermind, which I guess is why Dallas threw Cindy under the bus and took shots at her in his eviction speech. So, I can't believe Dallas is one of the 8 people to ever return on Big Brother Canada, and he reminds me a lot of Jace from Big Brother US, where they are both 2-time pre-jurors and their second time being a worse performance than the first, though their second showing has them being more mature, not only in personality, but in their gameplay, before starting to revert back to what caused them to be early out in their initial season. Dallas wasn't close with the veterans and didn't attempt to get close with them again until his butt was on the line, and like the first week in BBCAN4, he was on the wrong side of the vote, but he couldn't lie his way out of it, like he attempted to do in the last season, which is a good move. I did enjoy watching him more in this season, and I do think that his addition to the season with the veterans is good because he is more of a personality instead of a game bot, like a lot of the other veterans were. At the same time, when you think of the season, it is easy to forget about him, even compared to the likes of Mark. Definitely not a good player and an actively bad one, but I do think that the pettiness with a lot of the veterans in and out of the house not liking BBCAN4 definitely put him at the bottom of the veteran alliance, as well as just his additional bad gameplay all around. Week 3 is definitely a slower week compared to the prior 2 weeks, and despite it being kind of middle of the road, there are some decent moments in there that doesn't make it a boring week or a complete bore. Neda ends up taking the HOH win, and Cassandra thinks she has Dre, Aika, and Jackie on her side. She goes up to Bruno and immediately states that she wants Cassandra out this week, because Gary told her that in week 1, Cassandra threatened to backdoor Neda, which of course Neda never forgot about, and Bruno is thrilled about this. Immediately after Cassandra leaves the room, Gary tells Karen to distance herself from Cassandra, since he remembered telling her about the backdoor thing during the blow-up, and Karen also mentions that no one likes Cassandra. Cassandra has a weird vibe, since she knows that her relationship with Neda is not good. She asks Aika if Neda will put her up, and Aika isn't giving her anything, as she is avoiding eye contact. And Aika admits that her loyalty is to Neda over Cassandra, which is very ironic now, especially because I think Cassandra and Aika are now friends, where her and Neda clearly aren't after all this time still. Cassandra mentions that Jackie is her closest relationship with the newbie, and Jackie is a bit nervous as well. The Core 6 align, and they mention that everyone expects Season 3 to work together, and for Season 2 to work together. They talk about Gary and Cassandra, with Aika really throwing them both under the bus. Neda solidifies her relationships with Dylan and Emily, mentioning that they remind her of herself and John. I also believe Dylan knew John, so that was another reason as well. They start showing more of Aika and Dimitri's blossoming showmance, where he admits to her and Dre that he has a crush on her, and she mentions in the diary room that he is good looking and nice, but it's a friendship mance and not a showmance. At this point, we see Gary try to bond with Kevin, and we see Dre and William form a final two alliance called the French Connection. Gary admits that he wants to be the person who gives advice to everyone and to use that for a strategy, which we see with him and Cassandra giving her luck when she speaks to Neda about the nominations. I honestly do think this is an optimal strategy for Gary, and I remember him using makeup as a way to bond with people in the house. Cassandra notices that Neda has been avoiding her, which is a bad sign, and even when she tries speaking to Neda, she uses any excuse she can to avoid it, and speaks to Jackie instead. Neda reveals to Jackie that Cassandra has made alliances with everyone. Cassandra finally gets to speak to Neda, and mentions that she wants to go to the end with herself and Aika. Cassandra throws Dylan, Emily, and Jackie under the bus, which Neda tells Aika, who ends up telling Jackie. Neda nominates Cassandra and Jackie for eviction. She mentions that a social manipulator is more threatening than a physical threat, but it's clear that they both didn't like one another because they were the favorites on their seasons and are both Persian, so there was some petty competition there about who would be the new Persian strategic favorite. Jackie does not take the nomination well and starts crying as well as sulking. Cassandra mentions that Neda is jealous because Cassandra is the new Persian princess. Neda, Cindy, and Aika are in the HOH room, and Aika is now, for some reason, feeling some type of way about the nomination, which Neda senses. She makes the choice, or she says that she made the choice based on what everyone stated, and Aika states that it was solely her decision. I don't get where this is coming from, since Aika threw Cassandra under the bus literally less than 24 hours ago, knowing that Neda wanted her out. Neda walks away and talks about how Aika is very irrational to Bruno and Kevin, and Neda rants about backdooring her. Ironically, this is what Cassandra did to Neda a week or so ago, and I don't even think she was seriously going to backdoor Neda. Cassandra notices that Jackie is mad at her, and she's annoyed because Cassandra threw her under the bus, so she does not want to speak to her anymore. There's so much cattiness and pettiness between many of the girls at this point. William ends up winning the veto, and of course Cassandra tries to talk her way into getting him to use the veto. William talks up in the diary room how he wants to make big moves, and we know this won't amount to anything, especially when Cassandra cries in her conversation with him. Apparently, he is worried that Dre would be a replacement nominee if he uses it on Cassandra, making this all dead airtime. Aika and Dimitri are flirting with one another under the guise of her interviewing him for a friend. Karen and Gary have a fun segment in the kitchen, which then turns into a Karen segment where she gives everyone some nice life advice about how money isn't everything. Neda talks to Emily and mentions that if William does use the veto, she will have to backdoor Gary, I believe, which Emily is also fine with. It could have been Dre as well, but I don't remember all the details. William tries to speak to Gary, but gets interrupted when Cassandra enters the room and they both walk away. The two reunite again, where Gary flat out tells him that he would be stupid if he used it, since Dre or himself would go up, himself meaning Gary. Of course, William does not use the veto. It is clear that Cassandra is playing up to the cameras, and it's kind of annoying. Jackie pulls Dre in the room, and she mentions that Dre is trying to keep Cassandra in the house, which apparently is true, since while William likes and trusts Jackie, she doesn't and wants her gone over Cassandra. Aika tells Cassandra that she does not have the votes to stay, and that she can't vote to keep Cassandra, but she thinks Aika is bluffing, though she did this to Dallas the week beforehand, which Cassandra was present for. This conversation is really hilarious, but Cassandra mentions that she was in this position week 3 last year, and she got the 6 votes she needed to stay, and it just shows that Cassandra is stuck on what worked last year for her, and that she cannot adapt. Cassandra campaigns to Karen in hopes that her hatred for Jackie will cause her to vote in her favor. Dre tries to get Aika to vote to keep Cassandra, and it's a funny conversation. Gary, William, and Cassandra notice the group in the HOH room, which is the 6 of them and Jackie, who is kissing up to them, mentioning that Neda is acting like a queen bee, and he wants to keep Cassandra. Mentions that Aika and Dimitris need to be convinced. Cassandra, Dre, and Gary try to campaign to the couple to keep Cassandra. Everyone is put on slop, and Cassandra is thrilled, twirling around the house and mentioning that she's happy that everyone is on slop like her. Neda, Cindy, Bruno, and Kevin mention this and talk about Cassandra and her attitude even more, and Neda mentions that Cassandra overplayed and that she sprinted instead of running like a marathon, though that's technically what Neda is doing as well. But she's protected with the immunity. Jackie rats out what Cassandra said to Aika, who has a very tense conversation with Cassandra, telling her she doesn't have her vote and flicks her off with putting up her middle finger, which Cassandra blows off. Gary tries to convince Aika to vote for Cassandra to stay, but it's to no avail. Cassandra is voted out in an 11-0 vote. While there are still some entertaining elements to Cassandra in this season, it is clear that she let BBCAN Twitter and social media hype her up, and she was really leading into the character persona that worked for her in BBCAN4, and she refused to adapt. It became clear that she cared more about keeping her fan favorite status than really playing to win, and she did way too much in the first week, where she apparently made alliances with everyone, and I remember on the feeds, she really didn't have any personal conversations with the house guests, and she couldn't bond with anyone. It also kind of proves that she dominated in a weaker cast last season, but when she's in a different scenario and situation with a stronger cast, she can't really keep up. I still wanted her to have gotten that immunity in the first week, and for it to last longer, since I do think the season would have been very entertaining with her around, but it's clear that she just didn't get any momentum. And she does remind me of the likes of an Allison from Big Brother All-Stars, who just can't keep up with the momentum and couldn't change her gameplay. When it comes to the gameplay, week 4 was just kind of very middling, especially with the twist that was implemented in the week where it's backwards week, but it also made it stand out in a way because there's no other week like this in Big Brother history, and there are a few interesting moments like the slap vote and a few others that are kind of funny that keeps this from not being a bore. So Arissa explains backwards week, where the house has to nominate 2 people, and Neda did some work last week to make Gary a target for the upcoming week, with Dre being the other nominee. She nominates Gary and Dre, where she claims that they will talk to her when her immunity ends. Dre nominates Dylan and Emily. Emily nominates Gary and Dre. Kevin nominates Gary and Dre. He was crushed about nominating Gary since they were apparently allies. William nominates Bruno and Dylan. Dylan nominates Gary and Dre. Jackie nominates Gary and Dre. Bruno nominates Gary and Dre. Dimitri nominates Bruno and Jackie. Cindy nominates Dre and William. Karen nominates Jackie and Kevin. Gary nominates Emily and Dylan, and Ika nominates Dylan and Emily, where she goes on a long rant about them. Ika reveals to Netta and Kevin that she nominated Dylan and Emily, despite the Alliance's plans to nominate Gary and Drake, no matter if a twist came, and Kevin claims that he voted for Karen and Dre initially, though he nominated Gary and Dre. Gary and Dre end up being nominated with 6 votes, where Dylan, the third most highest vote, had 5 votes, so Dimitri screwed up with his vote, where if he voted Dylan, he most likely would have been a nominee. Netta goes into the pantry room with Bruno and Cindy, where she's pissed off with Ika, claiming that she gave her attitude because she voted for Dylan and Emily, though Netta went out of her way to make sure that they wouldn't target her or Dimitri. Netta realizes that Ika will choose Dimitri, Dre, and Gary over all of them. William is sending that Dre is nominated, and he is pissed off at Jackie, where they start arguing since he calls her stupid for believing that Gary had Dre campaigning for Cassandra to stay over her, though that's what Jay was doing, so Jackie is right, and she pretty much tells him to F off, and she of course rants to the people she voted with. Gary opens the door and walks off with that group talking about sending him home. Ika and Netta continue to rant about one another to the alliances, where Netta states that she knows Ika will rant and blow everything up when her back is against the wall, and that side of the 6 realized that Ika and Dimitri went rogue. Ika goes on a rant about the cat lover Netta being cocky, where she and Dimitri are laying in their bed admitting that they hate their alliance. Kevin continues feeling bad for having to turn on Gary, and after watching Dimitri and Ika kiss, he pulls Bruno into an intense conversation where he confronts Bruno about voting for him after telling him that he wouldn't target him. And he realizes that there is an alliance of 6. Netta ends up winning the power of veto, and Gary is not handling it well, since he realizes that he could go home. Ika tells him that he is the target, and that he doesn't have Bruno, Kevin, or William's vote, and that he only has Dimitri and herself. Netta, of course, doesn't use the veto, but apparently the entire house would have to vote for a replacement nominee instead of the person who had the third most votes, which was Dylan. Dre and Gary take shots at one another in their speeches, and she mentions something about his makeup and not being genuine, and he mentions that he only goes after people who goes after him. I don't remember the context of this that led to them going after one another here. Gary has a feeling that Ika is more loyal to Dre than himself, since he senses her weird energy. Netta also trashes Gary to Dre, as they have tension between them that started due to the mess on the sideshow about him forcing her to change her outfits on one appearance, and then the same thing happening in the second appearance that she was supposed to do, but that caused her to drop out overall. The slop vote was very interesting, since it showed everyone's true colors. Most of the house targets Gary because he is the target of the week and wants to see how he reacts on slop, since they all know his infamous BBCAN5 slop meltdown. Dimitri gets in hot water for voting Ika. Karen puts most of her votes in Jackie's. Jackie votes for Karen and Ika. Ika votes for Jackie while going on a long rant about Jackie. Netta and Gary take shots at one another while they vote and while they watch the videos, where Netta eventually sticks up her middle finger at him, and Ika sticks her middle finger at Jackie as well. So it's interesting that both Netta and Ika do this, and it shows that they are a lot more alike than they want to admit in their mean, petty behavior. All of this is for naught, since the people with the least votes are the have-nots, since it's opposite backwards week. William ends up crying, and Bruno has a kicking tantrum. Ika makes it clear to Jackie that she doesn't like her fakeness, and Jackie ends up crying to Cindy, since she was picked on a lot when she was a teenager. Netta rants about Gary to Kevin and Bruno, and Gary and Karen are thrilled that they aren't have-nots, but he now knows that he will be voted out, though he has a nice bonding moment with Karen. Aressa reveals that the HOH will have the sole vote to evict, and it ends up being Dimitri's. I don't know why he ended up winning this one. Before the competition, Dimitri promises Gary that he will vote to keep him if he is the HOH. Ika is mad about Dimitri stating to Canada that he likes sharing a bed with her, and he apologizes to her, but she isn't here for it, though they end up making up during the HOH competition since they're beside one another. Both Dre and Gary feel safe with Dimitri winning HOH, though the fact that he has to choose 2 of his allies means that I don't think it was a good move for him to win this HOH. And Ika isn't pleased that he won it, since he's getting more blood on his hands for an alliance that neither of them like and know that the other people in the alliance, don't like them. Aika talks to Cindy about not liking Netta's ego and attitude at this point, and Cindy agrees. Dimitri tells Gary that they need to talk, and Gary rants about Dimitri's and all the other fake A biatches, and is noticing that everyone, even Kevin, who is cuddling with him, and it's interesting that Kevin always finds himself in this position with gay men on his seasons, is pulling away. It is clear to him that Dimitri has pulled away since he got to power. After Dimitri and Aika kiss, she speaks to Gary to tell him that everyone is telling Dimitri to vote him out, and after thinking that Kevin has him, Aika tells him that Kevin is loyal to his alliance and gives Gary a really good pep talk about how he is a legend and how he shouldn't let people kick him out in this matter. Netta is annoyed when a video of Cassandra, which was recorded the night she was evicted, played, and it leads to some back and forth between Netta and Gary, where he mentions that you won't know the villain until you watch the show, hinting that she's getting a bad edit. We get the mean roast thing, with Netta starts an insult Cindy thing. This is something that they did in BBCAN5 apparently, and Netta apologized right away on the feed for the situation, though some debates that it was an insincere apology. This was definitely something that was exaggerated on the show. Dimitri asks Netta about her opinion of the vote, though he rants in the diary room that he sees through her game and is generally annoyed with her. Gary pitches to Dimitri once again, but none of it really matters, since it's clear, especially with the way that it was edited, that this was all a swan song for Gary, and Dimitri votes to evict Gary. Dre also throws shade at Jackie in her speech, mentioning that she will grow her hair red and starts throwing a bunch of lies out there. I don't know if she's hinting about Jackie's victimization and her being able to do that due to her phenotype and racial background. I don't know where Dre is coming up with this. It was interesting watching Gary this season, especially since he was a lot more mature than he was in Big Brother Canada 1, and he did try to change his strategy where he wanted to be the person giving people advice and to be that more authoritative person helping others. And it kind of worked, but it kind of didn't as well, though I do think that because he was so isolated from a lot of the cast, and with the beef with him and Netta, he didn't really have much of a chance to integrate into that veteran alliance. And it did seem like he wanted to work with a lot of the newbies. The allegiance with Kevin kind of went somewhere, but of course Kevin was going to stick with his people in general. I definitely enjoyed Gary in the season, and while he was screwed with this twist somewhat, he most likely would have been out anyways. But if there was the same competitions that happened, but in the normal order, with Dimitri being HOH, Gary wouldn't have been in danger overall. Overall, he played kind of just a middling, mid-at-best game, which was kind of how he played in BBCAN1 before he was evicted there too, so yeah. Week 5 definitely picks up the momentum compared to the middle of the road at best last 2 weeks prior, but a lot of it has to do with the double rather than the normal round in the week anyways. So, William ends up winning HOH, and quite a few people are worried, especially Dylan and Emily, since they think they'll be nominated. The Micah are thrilled that Dylan and Emily are mad, where Dimitris mentions that he hates that loser, referencing Dylan, and Ika wants to push for Jackie to go up. Ika is worried that they're being hated by Canada because they are playing the middle. Dre and Karen are, of course, thrilled with HOH results. The French Connection have a brief conversation with Ika where she pushes for Jackie and Dylan to be nominated, but William makes it clear that he wants to nominate Dylan and Emily. Bruno is worried about being nominated, but is told by Ika that he is fine, since it will be Jackie and Dylan or Emily. We start to see more of the Kevin and William stuff this week, and I mentioned earlier that it's very weird that he always finds himself in borderline queerbaity situations on Big Brother, but it's tenfold this season compared to BBCAN3. Dre is worried about Kevin and William's relationship since William is drunk at the moment and that he will spill everything to Kevin and Bruno via Kevin, making it clear that she wants Bruno and Kevin out, which she confirms to Dimitri a few moments afterwards. Kevin talks to Dylan a bit and mentions that William is going to nominate someone on their side of the house, but as long as Jackie is nominated, they will vote her out. Dre mentions that Kevin is latching onto him because Gary is gone now, and that he needs to play Kevin since he knows that it isn't real, and that people will think Ika or herself told him who to nominate. She pushes for Dylan, Emily, Jackie, or Bruno to be nominated. Ika and Dimitri realize that it's smarter to get at Emily over Jackie, since Dylan is a vengeful person who will take out the person who took out Emily, meaning he targets William and Dre. Jackie and Bruno decide to make their pitch to William, but it sketches out William that Bruno is now talking to him after almost no communication in 5 weeks. William nominates Dylan and Emily for eviction and uses the excuse that none of them talked to him after winning HOH. William mentions that Dylan is his target and he starts ranting to Dre about the nominations being unoriginal, but she mentions that neither of them spoke to William, Dre speaking to Dylan after Dylan ranted, just in case anyone was confused. And then Dylan starts to make more threats. Bruno and Neda realize that Ika put in the work to get him to not be nominated, and it causes for them to have more strong thoughts about the six, or at least in this moment. Dylan and Emily push for Karen to use the veto, claiming that Jackie will be the replacement if Karen won it, and pushes for William to nominate Jackie, claiming that they are just being friendly with her and they aren't working with her. Kevin wins the veto and immediately tells the couple that he probably won't use the veto, which pisses off the both of them, but Dylan specifically lashes out at Kevin, since they are allies since day one. This would do permanent damage to the relationship for the rest of the season. Dre comes up with an idea to get Kevin to use the veto on Dylan or Emily, telling him that they're putting up Jackie, but then William will really put up Bruno. The idea to trick Kevin is a cool idea, but Ika ends up spoiling the plan to Kevin, which they don't show on the episodes, so he doesn't use the veto. William is pissed off that Kevin didn't use the veto, though it came from a place of deception on his end. Emily pushes Bruno away after he tries to hug her, and the couple try to lash out at Bruno, who doesn't put up with it at all. They are telling him that Jackie would have went up, and that they spell it out to them that actually Bruno would have been the replacement nominee instead of Jackie. After that, William gives Kevin a piece of his mind while not lashing out completely. Emily pulls her alliance into the room, asking them who they would vote to keep, which causes everyone to be silent, hinting that it would be her that they vote out. Neda explained to Emily that Bruno would have been the replacement nominee, and it's selfish of them to want to put one of their alliance members in this position. Emily realizes that her entire alliance threw her to the wolves and that she has no chance of staying due to Dylan's relationship with John outside of the house. The six finally meet up, and it's clear that Kevin, Neda, Bruno, and Cindy want to keep Dylan, while Dimitri and Ika want to keep Emily. The French Connection sees them together and finds it shady, though they didn't even show the infighting that happened within the alliance on the show, with Neda and Ika getting into a few more fights during this week. Emily is evicted in an 8-1 vote. Honestly, Emily is arguably the most forgettable person on the season, and it says a lot since she's the last pre-juror, and the first 2 boots are more memorable than she is. I don't think she was a good player. She was always on the bottom of the house, and even though she was kind of grouped in with the Bruno and Neda side of the house, she was always the most expendable one, partially due to Dylan's pre-game connection with John, but also because they felt like she was less emotional in comparison to Dylan, and she was always going to be targeted by the Ika, Dimitri, William, and Dre side of the house. She left at the right time, and honestly, I'm struggling to find things to say about her. After Emily's eviction, they are told that Neda's immunity ended and that the jury phase has now started with this double eviction. Cindy ends up winning the HOH and nominates Dylan and Jackie. Jackie ends up winning the veto, and Ika immediately puts in the work right after the conversation to get Neda nominated. Neda ends up overhearing this, and of course she defends herself. Cindy ends up walking away with Bruno and Kevin, though they didn't show Kevin speaking to her, trying to get her to not nominate Neda. Neda and Ika argue in the pantry room, and it gets really nasty between the two of them, and it was apparently a lot worse than what was shown as well. Definitely some microaggressions from Neda's end, and then Ika slamming her hands on the wall. They continue arguing after Neda is officially nominated, and with the audience cheering/booing, it turned into a complete mess, and Neda even took some shots at Dimitri too. Neda is evicted on a 7-1 vote. I really didn't like how the edits just buried Neda, and while I really hated how the audience got into her eviction with them booing her, though it was ironic since they would often cheer for her and boo against her enemies in her prior seasons, it really just added another layer to her eviction that I just didn't feel comfortable with, and Cindy being a complete idiot. At the same time, Netta clearly wasn't having fun in the game. She looked miserable the entire time. I remember on the feed, she would isolate herself in the room with Jackie during the last 2 weeks, and she barely spoke to anyone that wasn't in her alliance. And I think it showed that even in her prior season, her social game was her biggest weakness. Strategically, she was still pretty good. She had a lot of control over her alliance, she was the kingpin, and she made a lot of moves that she executed well during her immunity phase. At the same time, she needed to relax a bit, and while she wanted to kill the perception of her being carried, her putting herself so much out there just meant that people were going to gun for her when her immunity ended, and she didn't build good relationships with anyone not in her alliance. At the same time, she still brought a lot to the season, and while I didn't enjoy her too much personally, and I didn't like some of the things she didn't change that much, though she did change her strategy a bit. Week 6 is one of the most boring weeks of the season where literally nothing interesting happened at all, and it's not even a funny week, it's just very bleh. Dre revealed that in the morning of the double eviction, Eichel told her about the secret alliance of 6. The remaining 5 of the alliance reunite in the pink bedroom, mentioning that they have to go after the other side, specifically Dylan and Dre, who are all in the washroom. All the newbies but Dimitri states that they need to go after the remaining 5 of the 6. After a long mental endurance competition, Dylan ends up winning HOH. Dylan mentions that he would put up Dimitri and Ica if he won, so Dre and William decide to throw the final HOH to him, though she wants to save Ica. And Bruno also makes a deal with Dylan earlier. Bruno, Kevin, and Cindy are ready to get at Ica Dimitri to get them out of the house, which is fair due to what just happened with the Netta mess, and the showmans are really nervous, since all of them know that the 5 is essentially over, but they are pretending that it still exists. Cindy goes to pitch to Dylan, since she was the only one out of the BBCAN5 crew to not have a deal with him, but he doesn't care for it, since she never talked game to him beforehand. Dimitri throws Jackie under the bus to Dylan and mentions that after this week, they can call a truce since he threw Dylan under the bus to stay in the first week. This was a good move for him and Ica to reach out to Dylan and to kill the truce, which many people don't do in Big Brother overall. Jackie tries to make a newbie pitch to Dylan, but he makes it clear afterwards that he does not trust her. Dylan speaks to Karen, who does not want Dimitri's nominated, but wants to target Kevin. Ica has Dre pitch to Dylan for her, but when Dre goes upstairs, she throws Dimitri under the bus since she wants Ica all to herself, which is a good move, but she could have handled it a bit smoother. Dylan nominates Jackie and Dimitri for eviction. Jackie is not thrilled at all that she was betrayed again, and Dylan mentions that she is his target, since he feels that she threw him and Emily under the bus to William last week, and I don't remember if this actually happened or not. Ica swears on her kids that she isn't after Dylan, and Micah officiates their truce with Dylan. Dre and Dylan talk and decide to work together, since they've always had a good relationship with one another, and want to join in on Karen with getting out the veterans. Dimitri ends up winning the veto. Cindy decides to throw Ica under the bus to Dylan so she could save herself, but Dylan is really sketched out by her. Of course, Kevin and Bruno are pitching hard for Ica to go up as the replacement, and everyone realizes that whomever is the replacement will probably go home. Karen starts bossing everyone around during a cleaning task, and it's pretty funny. William ends up finding the clue, which leads to the secret room, and that leads to the secret veto being found. Dimitri makes a deal with Dylan that he won't target him next week if Ica is not nominated. Dylan asks who he would nominate, and Dimitri says he would nominate Kevin and Bruno, and Dylan is perfectly fine with this, since he's still not over how they threw him and Emily under the bus last week. Bruno pitches Ica to Dylan and uses the same argument Cindy made, with Ica and Dimitri targeting him throughout the entire season. Ica mentions her last pitch to not nominate her, and she will show it in her actions in the future. Dylan is still not over the move Kevin and the other side made with him and Emily last week. None of this matters since Dylan nominates Cindy as the replacement nominee. Cindy doesn't know what to do with her campaign since she realizes that it isn't believable that she will target Karen and Dylan. Ica and Dimitri are celebrating in the pantry room and realize that they cannot nominate Dylan if either of them win HOH. Jackie is saddened since she is all alone, since everyone she aligns herself with, like Mark, Dallas, Cassandra, Emily, and Netta, goes home. Dylan tells Bruno and Jackie that he didn't think he would have the votes to get Ika out, and Cindy is upset because he didn't tell her beforehand that he was nominated her, like he did with Dimitri's, which should have been a huge sign for Cindy. Karen talks to William about how she wants Jackie out, but realizes that it is an emotional move. For some reason, Ika and Dimitri think they were hiding their showmance, which they so weren't, until Cindy sees them kissing, and it becomes a pretty fun moment where Cindy is chasing Ika around the house. Cindy decides to campaign to Dre and William with using Ika as a campaigning tool, mentioning that she told the other members of the five after the double that she would nominate Dre and William. Ika and Jackie come to a truce since Jackie needs their votes to stay and they want Cindy out anyways. It's ridiculous to think that William and Dre would side with Bruno and Kevin to keep Cindy, when it would have been easy for her to pitch to Jamaica to boot Jackie. Kevin and Bruno also make fun of their games throughout the season. Cindy is evicted on a 6-1 vote on her birthday. Cindy was actually in a really good position for most of the season, as while she was in the alliance controlling everything, she had the smallest target and she wasn't doing anything that would cause anyone to target her. So she could have just rode that alliance to the end while everyone took shots at the bigger threats. She learned to sit down and to not do the most, and it seemed like she was continuing onto this trajectory until the double eviction, where Ika made a suggestion to nominate Netta, and she had so much time to change her mind. Netta spoke to her, Bruno spoke to her, Kevin spoke to her, and Ika didn't even push her that hard after the first time, but she just refused to change her mind. Obviously, this not only destroyed her 6th alliance, but it got rid of a shield in front of her, like Netta, who wouldn't have targeted her and who everyone in the house would have targeted in the future weeks. And what makes it worse is that she protected the person, Dylan, who she didn't have any relationship with and who took her out the very next round. So she isn't an all-around awful or abysmal player anymore. She isn't a good player at all. But the season did show that she could improve and learn from her mistakes, though she ended up making the flashy move that didn't pay off for her whatsoever. Cindy was a pretty much an under-the-radar, likable presence on the show, though. Week 7 is another boring week of the season, and it really makes the midpoint of the season and the early Joy portion of the season the worst part of the season. So I'm just going to get right to it. Right after the eviction, Ika calls out Bruno and Kevin about campaigning against her, and she was annoyed that Kevin was trying to give her a hug, and he is really emotional about Cindy's eviction. It is clear that it's Bruno and Kevin versus Ika and Dimitri, with the entire house relaxing. Dimitri ends up winning the HOH competition, and Jackie reveals that she formed an alliance with Kevin and Bruno called the Peasant Alliance last week. Dre, Ika, and Dimitri get drunk in the HOH room, and the women start getting in the shower together while he watches. Karen and Ika also have fun shading one another. Kevin and Bruno come up with a pitch to the couple where the vets need to stick together, and next week when Dimitri cannot play, the other 5 will split up their showmance. Dre and Dylan have a conversation where they admit that after Kevin and Bruno are gone, they need Ika and Dimitri to get out, since they would rather take each other, Karen and William, to the end. Interesting that they didn't mention Jackie. Bruno and Kevin make their pitch, and they contemplated beforehand to throw the Peasant Alliance under the bus. Jackie senses something is wrong with the two of them being in the HOH room for far too long, and she wasn't in the room either, especially when they're in a new alliance. Kevin and Jackie have a tense conversation, and she snaps because this ends up happening every week to her. Jackie goes to the HOH room, which Dimitri rolls his eyes at, and because Bruno and Kevin throw her under the bus, Jackie throws them under the bus about the Peasant Alliance. Ika tells Dre and William about it, and they all agree to not tell Kevin, but William does exactly that, and Kevin leaves things out as he is talking to William. Despite seeing some other points, Dimitri nominates Kevin and Bruno for eviction. Dimitri mentions that Kevin is his target, and he mentions to Kevin that William told him that Kevin has been getting from him for weeks, which Kevin confirms in the diary room. This worries Kevin, since he realizes that William might be playing him, and doesn't like that their conversations are going to other people. William denies it, and mentions that he told Dre that Kevin wanted him out, and she apparently told Dimitri. Bruno speaks to Ika, and mentions that he is a dead man walking, and she mentions that he won't be if he is next to Kevin. Ika is worried about the nominations after her conversation with Bruno, since it's the other 2 vets outside of herself on the block. She has a conversation with Dimitri about her doubts and mentions that Karen told her that she wants all the veterans out. She has a conversation with him about it and talks herself into getting more and more angry. William ends up winning the veto, which causes Ika and Dre to talk about whether he will veto Kevin or not when they convince themselves that he won't use it. Kevin makes his pitch to William about how he will be his only ally if he uses the veto. Dre, of course, pitches to William that they have the votes to keep Kevin if he leaves the nominations the same. Ika takes her turn to convince William to not use the veto with a bunch of knight in Dimitri, queen with as in Ika, and peasant as in Kevin analogies. Kevin does not believe that Dre is claiming that they have the votes to keep him. And when Dre enters the conversations, she mentions that she outright doesn't like Kevin and that he is using William. None of this ends up mattering, since William uses his secret POV on Kevin and Dimitri uses Karen as the replacement nominee. Everyone is speculating about the secret video and who would use it. Dimitri immediately pulls Karen into the HOH room to assure her that he only put her as a pawn because she's the safest person to send Bruno home. Kevin is paranoid and thinks she will go home. Everyone suspects that either Kevin, Jackie, or William used the secret veto, though it's clear after a certain point that they know it's William. Karen rants to Kevin about this move, and mentioning that it was the only move he made all season, and she calls him stupid, where he tells her to not attack his character. Kevin asks if their final two is still on to aggravate her, and Karen continues ranting, mentioning that he needs to F off, and it's clear Kevin and Bruno want to rile her up so she could be sent home. William tells Kevin that he had the veto, and Kevin immediately tells Bruno, but they realize that pitching to Ika and Dimitri is the only way that Bruno can stay. The former people of the Sixth Alliance talk about Karen's ranting, and Bruno/Kevin, of course, pitch to them that Karen talks about them, and everyone wants them out. Kevin talks about his relationship with William and mentions that they are not in a romance because he wants to distance himself from William. Bruno continues to pitch to Dimitri, and after seeing Karen rant and rave about everyone, Dre tells her to cut the crap out and that she is doing more campaigning for Karen to stay than Karen herself is, and Dre rants to them about Karen's attitude. Bruno is evicted in a 5-1 vote. Bruno played relatively the same game here than he did in Big Brother Canada 3. Get into an alliance, ride with that alliance, and make some parachutes as well. And to not come off as the leader of the alliance. And it kind of works here, but I do think that his social game isn't as strong this season, as while he does have additional relationships with the likes of Dylan and Emily, he really struggles with making bonds with people like Dre and William, and even Dimitri, despite them being in an alliance together. It seems like a lot of people still didn't get over the move he made during the first week with trying to save Mark. And while he wasn't as emotional during this season, a lot of the same flaws that he had in his last season are present here, with the relative unadaptability, which actually declined in this season compared to Big Brother Canada 3, and using the same strategy. Overall, he's a middling to solid player in this season. Nothing extraordinary, but nothing too awful. But he doesn't have a twist that screwed him, unlike the last season. Though you can mention that the secret power veto was a twist, but William probably would have saved Kevin with the regular veto anyways. As a personality, Bruno was just kind of there this season. Though he did play a part in the Veterans Alliance completely crumbling, especially with targeting Cassandra and Dallas way too early, and it eventually led to his demise, as we went 6 weeks with a veteran going home, with him being the last veteran to get booted. So he did kind of play a part in his downfall as well, with dismantling the Veteran Alliance and not building strong enough bonds with Ika and Dimitri. Week 8 is debatably the strongest week in the entire season, and after a relatively tepid 2 weeks prior, this really picked up the season and had it start the position where it would end very strongly. So Kevin makes a deal with Dre and William, and they both drop out of the competition, though Dre makes it look like she tried to keep a ruse to Dimitri and Ika, and he promised them both safety. Kevin ends up winning HOH, and we learn that Bruno apparently caught him up on the dynamics and stuff before he left, since Kevin had no idea about the dynamics, which is a thing with him over his Big Brother journey. Dre wants Dylan or Jackie to win the HOH, since she wants Ika out, but she can't be the one to do it. Dimitri and Aika are very worried since they are the biggest target in the house, and they both realize that Dre abandoned them, especially since the comp was made for her to win over Kevin. Dre dodges all of Aika's accusations and speaks to Dylan and William afterwards, where they are thrilled that Aika finally doesn't have power. Dimitri and Aika are essentially pitching to Kevin the same pitch that Kevin and Bruno made to them last week. She mentions that they made a 1 week deal with Jackie to not nominate her, and they kept it, despite not liking Jackie. Aika has Dre pitch for them, which Dre is not about to do, and she actually throws them both under the bus hardcore. Jackie decides to repair her relationship with Kevin and throws Aika under the bus, but Kevin sees right through Jackie, mentions that he respects her game the least after she leaves, and he doesn't want to work with her because she leaks everything. Karen makes a pitch to Kevin, and he mentions that Bruno told him to work with Dylan and Karen, since they are the most loyal in the house. Karen mentions that the kingdom, which is Dimitri and Aika, are falling. William is more loyal to Dre, and Dre is in a precarious situation, since she knows that the showmance needs to be broken up, but she can't do it herself. Dimitri tries to make a shield deal with Kevin, who tells him that everyone threw them under the bus to go on the block. Dimitri tells Aika that everyone threw them under the bus, and she's doing the Brendan Big Brother 12 strategy in making herself the target by antagonizing everyone so she could stay. And everyone, even Dimitri, is pissed off at her for this, and it doesn't even work, like it didn't work for Brendan in Big Brother 12. Kevin nominates Dimitri and Aika for eviction. Karen and Aika are in the bathroom, and they talk about their declining relationship, since Karen mentions that Aika has been really mean lately. They start arguing over semantics, and Jackie intervenes, since Aika has been vicious and mean to her, and she wanted to get her digs in, and Aika tells her to shut up and to focus on her hair, hoping that it doesn't fall off, and Jackie throws a microaggression about Aika's hair not being real, whereas Jackie's is. More passive aggression happens between the two of them, where Aika picks Jackie's veto card, drops it, Jackie attempts to flip her hair in Aika's face, and then Aika stomps on her veto chip. Dre sees Aika crying in the bathroom and genuinely feels bad for her, causing her to now want Aika to stay, since it is better for her game, and to get Dimitri out. All this is for naught, since Dimitri ends up winning the veto, despite him repeating the insert name instead of his name for the first few times. Dre pitches to Aika that she needs to get Aika to have Dimitri veto her, since Aika is better for her game, and she doesn't know where Dimitri will be without her. She warns Aika that they're not going to vote for her to stay. Kevin is glad that Dimitri won the veto, since he thinks that he will fight Dre and William for votes, and Dimitri will be the bigger threat over him. Everyone starts kissing everyone during the party, almost akin to what would happen a lot in BBCAN5, and we get a segment about Aika talking about her journey with being an immigrant from Jamaica, her mother having to come here for a few years before she came over and getting her citizenship, which is a common story for not only immigrants in general, but specifically Jamaican Canadians. It's a really nice moment that humanizes her. Dre goes to speak to Dimitri to get him to veto Aika, and she claims that Dylan will vote for him over Aika, and Dimitri claims that he thought about it. Karen and Jackie throw one another under the bus to get the other to be the replacement nominee. Aika picks a fight with Dimitri about someone supposedly being too happy about winning the veto. Oh, sorry. She was picking a fight with him over him being too happy about winning the veto, which apparently was the case last time, though she wasn't even in any danger. All this is just weird, and would show Aika's many immature moments of the season where she would just deflect off of her own failings. Overall, they mention that Jackie needs to go up for her to have any chance of staying. Dimitri vetoes himself, and Jackie is named the replacement nominee. Kevin mentions that it might be better if Jackie leaves, since the others will nominate Aika and Dimitri again, where if Aika left, Dimitri and Kevin will be nominated together, which he states to William. Dre and Jackie are talking and mentions that the votes are wavering a bit. Jackie mentions that Aika will not get Kevin or Dimitri out, whereas Jackie will. Aika campaigns to William, and he is very standoffish, which causes her to worry. Dimitri had the chance to drive with a jury member, in a similar situation where Dan got to speak to Michelle in BB10, where he chooses Cindy, where she tells him flat out that they see him as Aika's lapdog. The night before the eviction, Dre tells Dylan that he's going to vote Aika out, and being mad at her indecision, Dylan throws her under the bus to Jamaica, with Karen being present as well, and they all get under the same page about Dre, and they make a Final Four deal. Jackie is evicted in a 4-1 vote, and she tells them that she wants a week free of Ica and then to send that biatch out, which is just very immature of her and such a low way for her to go out when she wasn't even involved in any of the drama that happened over the last 24 hours. Jackie was really annoying throughout this season. Her gameplay was never good, and while I would have appreciated her cockroach strategy, you can tell that she was doing it out of desperation and not because she actually wanted to. And no one trusted her in the house due to her actions, but she never took accountability for anything that happens. She got very emotional and would lash out at people, a lot of the times unwarranted. But then she wondered why people didn't trust or like her, and it didn't help that she would consistently release information about everyone in the house. At the same time, her antics brought a lot to the season, and she was a standout character compared to many of the other newbies. She was in a bad position where Mark left week 1 and she tried to save him, and she could never really reintegrate herself back into the house, no matter how hard she tried, and everyone just saw her as an expendable number. Dre notices that Ika's speech was about her, and Dre snaps at Dylan, since she knows immediately that he sold her out. She calls him out for being a flip-flop like Jackie, and she twerks, and she tells him to kiss the butts that twerks, which is just hilarious. Dylan mentions that she flip-flopped every day of the week, and they continue fighting before the HOH competition. Dimitri ends up winning the triple eviction HOH and nominates Kevin, William, and Dre, despite Kevin pleading with them not to, since he's still traumatized by being evicted in a triple 2 years ago. Kevin ends up winning the veto, where Dimitri doesn't play for some reason, which I never understood, and he is pissed off because apparently Dimitri and Ica made a final 3 with him a few days beforehand, though the couple didn't want to nominate Karen or Dylan, who just saved Ica minutes beforehand. Kevin pitches to Dylan and Karen that they work together to get out Ica and Dimitri, and he rants about them being the dirtiest and most manipulative players in the house. He mentions that Ica won't save William, and Karen will vote to save Dylan, so he pitches to keep Dylan. Karen tells Ica what Kevin told her, and Dimitri nominates Dylan as the replacement nominee. Dylan is saved in a 3-0 vote, so it means that Dre and William are evicted. Kevin throws the final 3 alliance to Dylan and Karen, and they mention that they cannot put them up because they just saved her over Jackie. They continue arguing, though Dimitri and Ica shockingly keep their calm during this argument. Dre was a joy to watch this season. I really liked her vibrant personality. I liked how she was about herself and how she was willing and actively planning a newbie revolt and to cut Ica and Dimitri, which is something we really see in newbie mixed vet seasons. She was in a relatively rough position in the first few weeks, since she was on the Gary Cassandra side of the house, and the likes of Nera and Bruno never let her integrate well into the house, though it was her bond with Ica that helped her get through those awkward parts in the beginning of the season. I just wish that she finally got power so she could have positioned herself well to have a successful path in the endgame, but she was a bit too indecisive in her last week, and her flip-flopping and playing double sides throughout the last 3 weeks was obviously going to catch up to her, and it did, and she had a really great downfall. Honestly, I find it hard to think about William throughout the season. He mentioned time and time again that he wanted to make big moves and he wanted to be this huge player, but he never really did so. And while it seemed like he was somewhat aware that Kevin was playing him, he still got very emotional over Kevin and never really took reins of his game, where he let Dre do a lot of the strategic work, despite William being the one who was better in competitions and had power more often than not. I do think that with English being his second language, it made it hard for him to communicate with many people in the house and to integrate himself with them socially and strategically. Overall, he was just kind of there in general, though he would have made it longer if it was a double eviction and not a triple, I presume. Usually, endgames are very, very, very boring, and week 9 continued the strong momentum that was built on in the last week, and this week was one of the best weeks in the house, despite there only being 5 people. A lot of drama, some good and bad strategy, and some funny moments and some heartfelt moments as well. Kevin wins the HOH competition unshockingly since Kevin and Dimitri have been winning the last several competitions, and he mentioned how he spent hours and hours and hours studying where he wouldn't socialize with anyone in the house. Of course, Dimitri and Aika are sad and knows that they will be nominated once again. She feels more bad because she never wins the competitions to help him out, while he constantly wins for them. Karen ends up having to do a fake letter shredding scene to end Have Nots, but she had to give punishments to the other four and they are watching, and it's just hilarious. They mentioned that it would make sense for Karen to vote her out, since Dimitri and Dylan would take her to the final two, and she tells him to take Karen to the final two if she is evicted this week. Kevin talks to Dylan about the final 4 and 3 with them and Karen, where they promise to take one another to the final 2. Apparently, this was fake on Kevin's end, and they didn't show this, but he made this deal so Dylan could throw the veto. Karen sees them speaking, and she tells the showmans everything, where they mention that Dylan will throw anyone under the bus to make it further. Kevin once again nominates Dimitri and Aika for eviction, with Dimitri being the clear target due to his competition prowess. The showmans refuse to campaign to Kevin since they feel like there's no more game to play. Aika makes a scene about Kevin being a hypocrite about broken promises, and he needs to be more honest about just being scared of them. She continues the argument over and over and over again, mentioning that his game cannot compare to hers, Dimitri will beat him in the competition, and Aika really comes off awful in this moment, while Dimitri is just focusing on making baking. Kevin ends up winning the veto, unshockingly, despite Aika helping Dimitri with the veto, which I thought was lame on the producer's part to allow that. The showmans are really sad, especially since they don't want to go to jury and to see the jury happy with one of their arrivals. And Aika is thinking about throwing the towel for him, where he tells her that the voters need to decide who goes home. The same frozen task that happened with the final 5 in Big Brother Canada 1, the most known moment of this being Andrew's brother speaking and hugging to him, with Sarah ending up appearing to throw pies and Dylan's mother appears where he has the equivalent of the Andrew moment, and it's ironic that they both went home during the same round. Kevin and Dylan have a conversation about who they will vote out, where Karen wants to keep Dimitri, since he has the best chance to beat Kevin, and Dimitri tells her that Dimitri needs to go, and that Kevin needs to follow. Sorry, it was Karen and Dylan who are having this conversation, not Kevin and Dylan. But Kevin joins them afterwards and asks them who they're voting out, and Karen mentions that she's voting Aika out, since she's the biggest threat. Since Kevin does not want Dimitri to stay, he comes up with a different plan, which is using the veto on Aika, despite both nominees taking their shots at him during their veto speeches. And I think she calls him a queen in her speech, which I don't know if this is due to her constant royal talk or some homophobia, but either way, it's an ugh moment for her. Dylan is named the replacement nominee, and everyone is completely shocked. Right after the ceremony, Aika runs up to clean everything in his room and undid the damage she and Dimitri did to the HOH room, apologizing to Kevin for taking it too far, and he's not as bad as she thought, and she does calm down towards him from that point onward for the rest of the game, and even up until today. Kevin tells Karen that he's hoping it will be a tie vote so he could vote Dimitri out in the tie vote, which Dimitri also mentions to Dylan. Karen hates the position that Kevin put her in, so she decides that she's going to vote out Dylan to piss Kevin off and to foil his plan. Dylan is of course pissed off when Kevin tells him that he used the veto due to what Karen said in the washroom about voting Aika out, and Dylan mentions that Karen was trying to convince him, but he wasn't going to do it. Aika is more nervous now that she's off the block, and Dimitri tells her that it's not in their head, and to not give Karen a reason to flip on them. There is a funny scene where Dimitri is translating the lingo, not really slang, but lingo mainly, that Aika is saying. Kevin is trying to piss Dylan off, so he will hate Kevin, which will cause Karen to vote Dimitri out. Dylan tells him that he thinks he's going home since Karen's body language has changed noticeably towards him. Dylan is evicted in a 2-0 vote. I remember loathing Dylan while I was watching the season live during the season airing and watching the live feeds, but he came off as a lot more tolerable here, but that could also be due to me forgetting a lot of the events that happened on the feeds. He did play a pretty poor game during the first half of the season, where he was an obvious target for everyone in the house, and after voting to keep Dimitri, he was with the people who had the least social ties, so everyone just kind of used him and Emily as shields, though it was always clear that Emily would go home before him. And when she left, he was actually in a very good position for the rest of the season, and he started to play a more self preservation game, making deals with people who he needed to make deals with, making up with people who he needed to make up with. And while he wasn't going to win the season, and he's still a pretty middling player overall, he definitely improved in the second half. And he did get into his fair share of drama. At the same time, he isn't going to be a standout in the season once you think back on BBCAN5. Week 10 is a relatively standard week, especially for final week, so I'm not going to mention how good or great or awful it is because it's just standard. So Dimitri wins the HOH, which is essentially immunity at the final four, and Aika is mad because he didn't let her win, which I think it's ridiculous because no one is entitled to give you anything in this game. It seems like a flaw in her game where, because she's willing to do these out-of-the-world things, that she feels entitled that other people should do that for her as well. Karen gives Aika some good advice about how they both came here to play the game and to win, and neither plan to fall in love, so don't make a regretful move. Aika pretty much admits that she's insecure that she couldn't win, and she took it out on him. The house talk about how Karen and Kevin's feud started, and they show a conversation in day 3 where Bruno and Kevin promised her to vote out Mark, and they went back on it 3 days later. Kevin cannot believe that she's still mad about something that happened 2 months ago. Kevin and Dimitri joke about the last HOH that wasn't either of them was Dylan in day 34. Dimitri nominates Karen and Kevin for eviction. All Kevin cares about is winning the veto, since he has been playing for himself for over the last 2 weeks, and the showmans are talking about their dream of making the final 2 together. He even mentions that he'll die happily after this happens, though clearly it's just metaphorical. Nothing notable happens since everything is so black and white. Kevin ends up winning the veto, and while he is excited, Dimitri and Aika are sad since they know it's over for her, and there's no way that she can escape her fate for the 3rd week in a row. We learn that moments after Dylan's eviction, Arissa gave the Final Four a chance to record videos to speak to the jury. Dimitri mentions that he had no idea what he was doing at first, but he needed to win competitions to navigate his way throughout the season, and that he made the moves to get out a lot of big players out of the season, and he has great statistics. Karen mentions that winning the first HOH caused her to figure out who she did and did not want to work with, and she chose to work with Aika and Dimitri within the first few days, and she's why the power couple is here. Kevin mentions that he's been a lone wolf and he needed to win competitions, and that he wants to be a winner more than anything in his life. Aika mentions that she's had a lot of issues with the jury, and she has made a lot of logical/strategic choices and took the personal stuff out, and she hopes that the jury votes for the best player in the game. Aika makes a last-ditch plea to please Kevin's ego so he won't look like a bad player, so she mentions that it's a weak move to take a weak player to the final 2, and it would be great for him to take the best players to the end and to beat them. Aika and Dimitri have reached the acceptance phase of her fate, and Kevin votes out Aika. So I mentioned that her BBCAN2 game is one of the worst ever, and I still stand firm in that. But as we've seen with many of the returnees in this season, and many of the returnees in Big Brother, and even in Survivor, returnees rarely learn from their mistakes in their prior appearances, and they rarely change their strategies. So I give Aika credit for being one of the few who actually learned from her mistakes and improved in all facets of the game. She left BBCAN2 with a lot of regrets, and she came into the season wanting to play so she wouldn't have any regrets, and she definitely lived up to that. She had the power of persuasion with so many people in the house, and a lot of her out-of-the-world ideas actually worked because she just went for it, where a lot of people just sit back. When she needed to speak to someone and to make amends, she did. When she needed to turn on certain alliances and allies, she did. When she needed to make new deals, whether they were temporary or for a few weeks, she did them, and she kept her word with these deals. Her issue in BBCAN2 is that she couldn't find an ally that worked well with her, and while Adele was closest, she couldn't accomplish anything with him. And Her saving Dimitri was the best thing that happened to her game, since they bounced off one another very well strategically, as he used the calming force and he had a more straightforward path and strategy, and that worked well with her more unconventional strategies. At the same time, when she was great, she was a brilliant social player, but when she got mad and immature, it really showed an ugly side to her, and it reminds me why she isn't the most likable person there. And this affected her jury management, where a lot of them did not want her to win. It is weird that she couldn't win a competition in this season, where she won two in BBCAN2, and she didn't even make it to the halfway point in that season. Overall, Aika is the clear standout of Big Brother Canada 5, and the season would be a lot worse without her, despite me not necessarily liking her a lot of the time, though she was definitely a lot more likable here than she was in BBCAN 2. Most improved player, for sure, out of all the veterans. There is absolutely no intrigue in this Final 3, and it's more black and white than the prior 4 Final 3s, though Final 3s in general are very straightforward. Dimitri wins part 1 of the final HOH, Kevin wins part 2 of the final HOH, just due to the statistics, and Kevin studying most of the competitions of the first 4 seasons before entering the house this season. It was clear who would come out on top, which happened when Kevin wins part 3 of the final HOH and evicts Dimitri. It's weird because I remember preseason, so many people thought he would be an obnoxious jerk, and while he definitely had a petty side to him, hence getting along with Aika, he was actually a really cool dude. Of course, he's one of the best competitors in Big Brother Canada, and I believe he's the only one, or at least at this point, who was able to win 5 HOHs. I think someone in BBCAN5 tied him for that record. He handled being on the block week 1 very well, which is why he was able to stay, despite Bruno and Kevin's last-minute attempt of a flip. He was able to make certain bonds with certain veterans like Cassandra and Eka, which definitely helped him out. And I do think while he had a good social game as just being a nice person in the house and having good jury management, especially with his goodbye messages, there was definitely a roadblock that he had with other people socially and strategically, where a lot of them prefer to deal with Aika when it comes to the strategic elements, despite him being a lot easier to deal with. He is definitely a himbo with all of his antics, where he was just kind of humorous and was easy to laugh with and at times, though he wasn't dumb either. So I guess he wasn't a himbo in that element. Overall, he was a great presence in the season, and I really, really, really wanted him to pull it out, since it's so rare for newbies to win in mixed seasons. It became a point where most of the newbies kind of treated him like a veteran during the later part of the season, so it shows how well he could keep up with the best of Big Brother Canada. It is time for the final deliberations, and Neda asks Kevin if he was actually loyal to her, and he answers that he was loyal to her, and mentions that he told Cindy to not put her up. Cindy asks Karen if she thought she was the target every week, since she secluded herself from many house guests, and Karen says that she did think she was the target every week, since she was paranoid well before the house and will be paranoid well after the house. Bruno asks Kevin what his biggest move was, and he mentions that his biggest move was vetoing Aika at the final 5, despite not speaking to her for the last 4 days. Jackie asks Karen what she meant when she said that she carried Aika and Dimitri's, where Karen mentions that she had 2 opportunities to take them out and she chose not to. William asks Kevin if he thought that he would be there if he never used the secret veto on Kevin, and Kevin admits that he would not have been there. Dre asks Karen if she used her age to her advantage and strategy, where Karen mentions that she did use it to her advantage. Dylan asks Karen for a specific game move that got her to the end, outside of winning the first HOH, and she mentions building relationships with Dimitri and Aika, and also killing her truce with Kevin when Dylan went home. Aika asks Kevin what moves he made with his master manipulations, and Kevin outright admits that he isn't a mastermind, but he mentions that he made a fake Final 2 deal with Dylan, which caused him to throw the Final 5 veto. Dimitri asks Kevin why they should vote for him to win when Kevin started playing on day 48, where he started playing on day 2. And Kevin mentions that he stayed under the radar for the first half of the game, and mentions that he deserved Dimitri's vote because he got him out. Karen's speech is about using determination, well, a lot of luck, in addition to relationships that caused her to live her dream, and she thanks everyone. Kevin's speech is about getting a second chance to play, how he strategized and tried to make relationships every day. He didn't have eyes for the second half of the game, though that was definitely not true. He went into the backyard many times to win, and he got very emotional, stating that an epic season like this deserves to have him represented. Kevin went in a unanimous 9-0 vote. It was nice to see Karen last so long in the season, since there are many people in her archetype before this season and after the season who go home very early on. And to see her stick around gave a new perspective on the season and a new dynamic to the season. At the same time, there really isn't much to talk about strategically with her. She obviously won the first HOH, and the so-called big move she made was the optimal move that always happens in mixed seasons in general. And after that, she was literally just a coaster, and she made emotional moves like booting Dylan in the final five over Dimitri. Overall, she was a fun enough presence throughout this season, though there are some points where she just got really annoying, and I thought she took it too far, especially when she was nominated against Bruno. Kevin is a really nice guy, and it's actually a very impressive trait that he has, where people can go in on him and say the most awful things to him, and he keeps his cool, he keeps his calm, and he never goes low with them. He definitely tried to keep Mark in the house, which is the optimal move for him, but the way he handled it definitely put a target on him for most of the season, where many people saw him as untrustworthy, especially since it was a last minute flip and he couldn't pull it off. He definitely hid behind the likes of Neda and Bruno within his alliance, which was the optimal move, and he didn't have the best read on the house, which was something that he dealt with in BBCAN5 and was still the case here. But he didn't do much to actively piss many people off in the first half, and he wasn't on a complete island like he was in BBCAN3. Of course, when his allies started going home, he had to rely on competitions, and while it was impressive how he essentially broke the game with knowing how the competitions are formulated in BBCAN, and while seeing him and Dimitri win like the last several competitions was kind of interesting, it still isn't as satisfying because competitions was the only area where he was great in. Where while he somewhat improved socially compared to BBCAN3, and strategically he was a bit better than BBCAN3, it was still very lacking. So those were my overall thoughts on BBCAN5, and I love it now just as much as I did when the season was taking place 6 years ago. I'm glad that this wasn't the final season of BBCAN, and we got to see how the show evolved from this point onwards, and we got to wrap up this first set of BBCAN the players for good. Kind of like how Big Brother All-Stars wrapped up that first set of the show and that first set of house guests. It will be interesting to watch the future seasons since they are all one-time players, and I don't foresee Big Brother Canada ever doing returnees ever again. And it will be interesting to see how the 8 players who played in this season will change when I rank all the BBCAN players, which I probably wouldn't include BBCAN8 in. So I'm still going to make some more compilation videos and some more season reviews. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with something soon. Bye!